My name is Jennifer. 6 months ago, I watched as my parents' house was sold at an auction. It was a moment of both relief and closure. The house that had once been a source of so much stress and false pride was now just another property on the market. But this wasn't just any house sale. It was the culmination of a long, standing battle with my parents, a battle I finally won. Let me take you back to the day it all came to a head. My 8-year-old son, Ethan, was having an anaphylactic shock at school. I was stuck in a snowstorm, miles away, trying desperately to reach my parents. They were in the middle of a high-end spa treatment for my sister Lily's skin rejuvenation. When I called my father, Richard, on the satellite phone, begging him to drive just 15 minutes to the school and authorize the EpiPen that could save Ethan's life, he simply said, "Stop being so hysterical, Jennifer. We're in the middle of something important." And then he hung up. In that moment, I felt a cold, hard anger. I realized that my son's life was at stake because of their vanity. I couldn't waste any more time. I called a private rescue team I had on standby for risky environmental research. They quoted me an astronomical fee, but I didn't hesitate. I gave them my credit card details without a second thought. Ethan's life was worth every penny. 3 hours later, I arrived at the hospital, covered in snow and ice. Ethan was stable, thank God. As I sat by his bedside, my phone buzzed. It was a fraud alert from my bank. The family support card I'd given my parents, which I'd told them was for emergencies and essentials, had been used for a $6,000 spa bill. While I was fighting for my son's life, they were pampering themselves. My parents, Richard and Vivian, had always been obsessed with appearances. They came from middle-class backgrounds, but spent their whole lives trying to live like the wealthy elite. They looked down on my career in environmental science, calling me tree hugger and saying I was wasting my time. They had no idea that my research on soil fertility had earned me a patent and a steady stream of income. For years, I'd been the one paying their bills, covering their debts when they overspent on luxury cars and designer clothes. 3 years ago, when their mortgage was about to swallow their house, I set up a blind trust through a broker named Alex. I became their silent creditor, thinking that if I helped them, they'd finally respect me. But I was wrong. After seeing the fraud alert, I knew it was time to take action. I called Alex, and he was hesitant at first, but I was determined. I told him to offer my parents a commercial bridge loan of $300,000. The interest rate should be tempting but strict, and the capital improvement clause airtight. 2 days later, Richard called me, excited. He said he just landed a big deal with a private equity group that offered him $300,000. He didn't ask about Ethan or why the credit card had stopped working. I asked him what he planned to do with the money, and he scoffed at the idea of paying off debts. He said he needed to look successful to attract clients, so he was going to buy a new BMW X7. I warned him to be careful with the loan terms, but he arrogantly told me he knew how to handle it. He admitted to laundering the money through a shell company to get around the restrictions. That was federal wire fraud. I waited until I knew he was at the country club, surrounded by the people he wanted to impress. Then I called Alex. The BMW purchase was confirmed, and Richard had even sent a photo of the title to the loan officer to brag. I told Alex to execute the confession of judgment. Within minutes, the deed to the house was transferred to my LLC. A process server was sent to the country club to serve Richard with an eviction notice. When I heard that he was shocked and stammering, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. But they didn't go quietly. 3 days later, they sued my LLC, claiming the loan terms were unfair and that they'd suffered $4 million in emotional distress. My broker was worried, saying they could drag the case on for years. But I'm a scientist. I told the broker to demand all receipts for their so-called capital improvements. 2 weeks later, our forensic accountant, Lisa, quickly exposed the fraud. The construction company they claimed to have hired was a fake, and the invoices were forged. I handed all the evidence to the FBI. The agents raided their house, seized records, froze accounts, and impounded the BMW. Richard had a stroke while arguing with his lawyer. At the hospital, Vivian accused me of causing it, but I knew it was his own greed and arrogance. When the doctor asked for a financial proxy for expensive surgery, they had nothing. I told the doctor I had no obligation and walked out. After the auction, I used the proceeds to create a scholarship for first-generation environmental science students whose families discouraged them. My parents' legacy now supports the very thing they mocked. Ethan is doing great. We spend our weekends testing soil in the forests. He understands why we don't visit his grandparents anymore. Yesterday, as I stood in the woods, feeling the earth beneath my feet, I remembered that sometimes you have to cut away the rot to let something beautiful grow. That night, I deleted the spreadsheet where I tracked every dollar I'd given them and every insult they'd thrown at me. The silence that followed was peaceful, not empty. If you've ever had to cut toxic people from your life, you're not alone.